Hi, Kate here with another video, and I hope everyone is doing well. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. I'm at 230 something subscribers. My last two videos were pretty popular. One on Jackson Hinkle and one on George Galloway was really about 1,300 viewers, pretty biggest I've ever had. Okay. Anyway, this is a book review of sorts on Corporate Coup by Anya Parampil. It's about Venezuela. Anya Parampil is one of the members of the Grayzone. Now, introduction here. I'm a big supporter. I'm a big fan of the Grayzone. I've been watching it the last few years. I'm a huge supporter of them. Max Blumenthal is good. The chief editor is great. He's the leader. Great. A little bit about them. Max Blumenthal was the husband of Anya Parampil. He was the son of Sidney Blumenthal, who was a big wheel in D.C. He was advisor to the Clintons. I could see Max Blumenthal as kind of a traitor to his class. People ask him, "Do you get along with your dad?" He says he does. His Sidney Blumenthal used to be a Maoist, apparently. Now he's one of those dead people made his peace with the establishment advisor. Said, we get along. Max says, we get along. We disagree about the Clintons, but we get along. Max Blumenthal went to the University of Pennsylvania. He came of age during the Iraq War. And like me, like a lot of people thought that, Democrats are horrible, Democrats are bad, but the main thing is to get rid of these crazy right-wing Republicans. But he evolved. He had a deeper analysis of it. He was in independent media. He worked for the articles in the Nation. Articles in the Nation, the Daily Beast, the Intercept, Salon.com, Alternate, and so on. And he was in indie media for quite a while. He was an alternate. He was with Al Akbar, English language Lebanese paper, in 2011 to 2012. He left because he thought they were too pro-Assad. This was the early stage of the Syrian civil war, and he left because they were too pro-Assad. He evolved, like a lot of people. He evolved on that issue and became more anti-imperialist. Developed, I think, a deeper understanding of what was going on. He was chief editor of the Alternate, and the Grayzone spun off of Alternate in 2018, I believe. Not too long ago. I've been watching it ever since. So another figure is Aaron Mate, who was Canadian. He's the son of Gabor Mate, therapist, Canadian, Vancouver, based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canadian therapist. Gabor Mate is a Holocaust survivor, a Hungarian Jewish background. I believe he was in Auschwitz when he was 5 years old. Anyway, he's a therapist, famous therapist, has worked with addiction and trauma. I didn't connect the two until relatively recently. And Gabor Mate is Aaron Mate's father. I didn't even realize this until relatively recently. Aaron Mate went to Concordia University in Montreal. He was active in Palestinian solidarity work. He was vice president or vice chair of an anti-Zionist group. He said he had an identity complex, a bit of identity complex. He's Jewish, and he was an anti-Zionist, and this is a bit of there's a documentary, but I haven't seen it, but a documentary about him called Discordia, which talks about the conflicts he was going through back then. And he worked for Democracy Now! And for semi-indie, lefty, liberal left outlets like that. He was chief research assistant to Naomi Klein when she wrote The Shock Doctrine, which was a masterpiece. I'm not a big fan of Naomi Klein, but The Shock Doctrine is an absolute masterpiece. My theory is that he was chief research assistant for her when she wrote the book. My theory is that he probably wrote a lot of it himself, but for obvious reasons he can't say this. But anyway, he's with the Grayzone. He was famous for debunking the Russiagate nonsense. He very well documented, went down, bang, bang, bang. The whole narrative is nonsense. It was made up and by the CIA and the security state. James Clapper, all these people, bang, 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 bang. He debunked that. Also famous for debunking the propaganda against Syria. The OPCW, the Duma, that Assad never gassed his own people. And he's not pro-Assad. He doesn't like Assad. He severely criticizes Assad. Say the narratives, the white helmets narratives of Assad was gassing his own people. Politically or militarily, it didn't make any sense anyway. And he just tears apart the whole narrative. They call him Buzzsaw Mate. And he's really good at that. Max Blumenthal recently has been dissecting the narratives on the October 7th that, first of all, that there were no mass rapes. Zionists are saying this as an orgy of mass rapes. There's no evidence this happened. And they were rolling this out. The mainstream was going to roll this out as a major propaganda offensive. The New York Times, this guy Gettleman, New York Times, he started he was going to start a podcast, supposedly a feminist podcast project, using this October 7th mass rape thing launched. They were launching this big thing. New York Times and the Washington Post. Max deflated this whole thing. He did a lot of intense research. Wait a second, there's no evidence. And he had a fight with Haaretz. Haaretz is a liberal Israeli daily. Had to finally admit, yeah, he's right. There's no evidence that there were mass rapes. It didn't happen. And it didn't make any sense. Not you don't have to support Hamas, but there's no evidence this happened. Another thing, the Hannibal, Max talks about the Hannibal directive, the Hannibal doctrine that the IDF Israelis are deliberately kill their own people. And this is stated. We know this exists. He makes a claim that it's pretty widespread during October. Maybe as many have. A lot we don't. We'll never know. What happened, and were deliberately killed by under the Hannibal directive. And he makes his case really well. And the Zionists really hate him. Zionists hate his guts right now. And there's waves of media smears against the Grayzone. The Mason hates them. Washington Post, well, 2 smear campaigns against them. Read anything about read them about the Grayzone or Max Blumenthal on Wikipedia. It's a total smear job. They really tried to make them look bad. There was this event in Portugal, Lisbon, I believe 2022, called the Web Conference. They were about internet influencers, and the Grayzone was invited. They were disinvited by Zelensky's wife apparently put pressure on the organizers to disinvite them, and they were. And there's a whole series of other instances like that. TYT, the Young Turks, Chenkwager, Anna Kasparian, on their subscribers only section. This is like 2022, I believe. Anna Kasparian went on a rant, an unhinged rant against Aaron Mate. Aaron Mate, fuck Aaron Mate, and she flipped the bird. There was no substance to it. There's total smears. Aaron Mate supports dictators, and she offered no specific, just a rant, no specific things in which they could debate about, and made them look real. So that this was a big ruckus in the media. The mainstream, even the mainstream liberals, really hate the Grayzone. Louis Poirier hate them. Now, Max was kind of like, might say, was originally very anti-Assad. He kind of switched. He saw correctly, I think, U.S. imperialism as the main problem. There are also other people who work with the Grayzone. Wyatt Reed was recently hired full-time on independent journalist, American independent journalist. He was one of the few people doing journalism from the Donbass, the Russian area. And the story hit kind of a couple months ago, or maybe 7 or 8 months ago. His hotel is a hotel in Donetsk where a foreign journalist was hit by the Ukrainian bomb, a Ukrainian missile, deliberately targeting journalists. He said he almost got killed. He was going back to his hotel, and he said if he was 20 seconds faster, he would have been killed. Narrowly escaped being killed. Pretty wild story. Another guy, Wyatt Reed and Kit Clarenberg, a British journalist. The British government was giving him a hard time. He was flying back from somewhere, and they detained him at the airport for a long time. I'm puzzled the Grayzone still exists. In a matter of time, they're going to close them down. And Max even said this, well, I'm going to keep doing this no matter what. Even I could see them in near future having to go to Venezuela or Cuba to keep doing it. I could see them doing this. The mainstream clearly hates them. They become a little more popular. Recently, Max had a speech at MIT for the Palestine Solidarity protesters. He gave a talk, and it was very well received. The wild applause, very well received. A couple years ago, you wouldn't have gotten this. Max was kind of ostracized by the left. Oh, he's a horrible Assad apologist. He's a tanky. The third campus left really hates him, but things have changed. I think they're much more receptive to their message, what they're trying to say. Okay, another figure who is with the Grayzone no longer is Ben Norton, who independent journalist. He worked his way up through various independent media. He did he did a podcast or a YouTube video podcast with Max. It was Moderate Rebels. And the opening scene of this was hysterical. Had a montage of recent history. The term moderate rebels was goofing on the Syrian civil war. There were no moderate rebels, except at the very beginning. There were no moderate rebels. And Grayzone have dissected this. So anyway, the opening scene of the Moderate Rebels had a montage of clips. They had Ellen DeGeneres dancing with Hillary Clinton, that weird scene. Then there was Trump with the Arab leaders and the orb, and they kept, and a whole bunch of scenes like this. Moderate rebels, moderate rebels, moderate rebels. It was hysterical. The opening scene, I love the opening scene. And Max and Ben had this interchange. It was really interesting. It was a good show. Max came off. No, Ben Moon came over as more of a steely-eyed Marxist-Leninist. He didn't have much of a sense of humor. Steely-eyed. Max has a good sense of humor. Um, yeah, they co-wrote. They co-wrote an article about there's the organization, the ISO, International Socialist Organization. I was briefly in it years ago. They collapsed in 2017, I believe. They collapsed. They're like a third campus. What's called third campus. Yeah, U.S. imperialism is bad, but what about the other guys? I don't think that way. I'm more solidly anti-imperialist. So anyway, the ISO collapsed there in, I think, 2017 or 2018. They're in a lot of abusive, internal abuse, and they're basically horrible, shitty organization. They're really a big thing on the U.S. left for a time. I think it's good they collapsed. Anyway, every year they would hold a socialism conference in Chicago. It's run by their publishing house, Haymarket Publishers. So Haymarket still exists. The ISO collapsed. Haymarket still exists. They were kind of autonomous anyway. And so Ben and they continued the socialism conference after the ISO collapsed for like one more year. And Ben and Max Blumenthal, Ben Nord went to it, and they would give a write-up of it. Said the whole thing had Color Revolution vibes. All these groups and NGOs were there. If you go to a conference like that, they have these booths and tables and booths and stuff, zillion different organizations set up there. And he said a lot of these groups were like Ford Foundation or National Endowment for Democracy, kind of CIA money behind it. There was strong, this thing had a big Color Revolution vibes. And they wrote this article about it, really slamming it. And I agree with them. This article, a huge ruckus, but that's okay. Anyway, later on, what am I thinking here? Yeah, interesting. They had Ben or Max and Ben anyway. They interviewed Jimmy Dore. I forget if Jimmy Dore interviewed them or they interviewed Jimmy Dore. It's pretty wild. So somebody kept saying on the chat, hey, a couple of times, hey Ben, get Jimmy, have Jimmy read some Lenin. Kept saying a couple of times, Ben, have Jimmy read some Lenin. So eventually Ben did. Said Jimmy read State and Revolution by Lenin, which is a must-read masterpiece. So Jimmy said, well, I don't know, reading's hard. Jimmy Dore's not an intellectual. But, he apparently another episode, Jimmy Dore's show, he had the Robert Tucker Lenin anthology he was waving. Look for a time that Jimmy Dore might be the American exponent of Leninism. I don't think it did play out that way, but it was kind of interesting. Anyway, Ben Norton left the Grayzone, I believe it was in 2020, not in good terms either. Apparently stories, according to Max Blumenthal, I think I mentioned this in an earlier video, Ben Norton stole the website, the Moderate Rebels website. Basically, he changed the passcodes and locked everyone else out of it, changed the name, and stole it, essentially. Now, it's important because it has like a revenue stream. They have subscribers and donors. I think they pulled in like $17,000 a month, which is good for like a moderate-sized website. Essentially, he stole it. He didn't, he could have left under, okay, I disagree with, he got pissed off over COVID. Now, I have to emphasize the vaccines are safe and effective. Everyone should be fully vaccinated. I know I am. Everybody should be. COVID is serious and every blah, 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 blah. Okay, but anyway, so Max Blumenthal first came out against the COVID narratives. He disagreed with it. He gave space on the left for people disagreeing with Olson. Blah, 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 crazy anti-vaxxer. So Ben Norton just got pissed off. He left. And according to Max, he stole their website. Actually, Jackson Hinkle first mentioned this. Max probably told him. Then later Max said it himself. There's a video clip of Max confronting Ben in Nicaragua. Ben Norton lived in Nicaragua. He's a Nicaraguan girlfriend. And he moved to China recently, in Beijing. I don't know what he's doing there. But apparently, so it's a tour bus. It was a tour bus for sympathizers of the Sandinistas. Okay, so Ben Norton was there with his Nicaraguan girlfriend and Ben Norton's brother and his brother's wife. So Max was there with his wife, Anya Parampil. And they kind of confronted, said, Ben, I think it's important for Grayzone viewers to understand what's happening. You stole our website. We tried to get mediation. You wouldn't. It broke down. You violated the agreements, and we tried to reach a deal. You stole it. And what kind of a man are you? What kind of a Marxist steals things? He's clearly really angry. And this gave Ben Norton a chance to give his side of the story, and he didn't. He just kept saying, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Ben Norton's apparently really small, short guy. Apparently he has autism. Nothing wrong with this. I'm not, but he, very short guy. Apparently his Nicaraguan wife was trying to fend Max away. Get out of here, get it. His brother was, get out of here, get it. His brother's wife was disengaged, it seemed to, but a wild scene went on for a while, wild scene. And Anya Parampil was standing behind Max. They were confronting Ben in a wild scene. I don't 100% know what was going on there. I tend to agree with Max. Okay, and then Ben Norton named the website Multipolarista, which is kind of pretentious. Then he renamed it to the Geopolitical Economy Report. I watch it once. I watch it once in a great while. I'm not a fan of Ben Norton, but once in a while I do watch it. Anyway, also the Grayzone did work with Rania Kalik. I don't think she was officially a member, but she was close to them for a while. She's after Ben left, she doesn't not anywhere near them. And I'm not. Randy Kellogg was weak on Afghanistan. She actually thought U.S. troops should stay in Afghanistan for stability. That's what's weird. So anyway, they left. So that was a whole incident. Okay, Anya Parampil. I'll talk about her a bit. They married, I think, in 2022. They just went to the University of Pennsylvania. She was an RT. I don't know much about her career. She worked at RT for a while. She was fired, I think, in 2022. There's not nothing wrong. She was internal fighting. There was she made a couple documentaries, two documentaries as far as I know. One about Korea, called Imposed Division, which I saw the first third of it. It's actually very dry and boring, to be honest. I couldn't get through it, but it tells the horrible role of the U.S. in the Korean War. The U.S. bears a lot of responsibility, all the responsibility for this horrible things the U.S. did and imposed this separation. It didn't have to play out that way. And I wasn't. I agree with her, and I wasn't anything I didn't know, but just so dry. Interviews just so dry. Anyway, see another documentary on Netanyahu called Crime Minister or Prime Minister, 25-minute documentary. I was looking for it for a while. It's on RT. I might provide a link. RT in the film, the documentary section. As far as I know, she had two documentaries, and she's written a fair amount of stuff. So anyway, okay, this book is on Nicaragua. The book came out very recently, a couple of months ago. I got an advanced copy and a review of sorts on it. So a little, okay, before I do that, more things about Anya Parampil. A couple months ago, she got in trouble on Twitter by saying that Zionism is not white racism. Like, what? Like, it is. It's partly it's Jewish ethno supremacy, or meant to be, but there's a big element of white supremacy in it as well. Like, well-known Ethiopian Jews were sterilized. There are cases where that Mizrahim, Middle Eastern Jews, were really discriminated against. Generally, Ashkenazis are on the top, generally oriented towards Northern European white Jews. There's a case of a group of South Africans, like Dutch Afrikaners, several families in South Africa who converted to Judaism. And they moved to Israel, and they have their own village in the West Bank. Not making this up. They're kicking local Palestinians off their land. People have been there for hundreds of years. So these are just a group of Dutch converts to Judaism. They just moved to Israel and kicked the local people off. Now, there are cases of African Americans who've converted to Judaism, and they're not recognized as Jews. The government deports them, been giving them a hard time. There's a strong racist element in Zionism. So yeah, I would absolutely say it has elements of white supremacy. Absolutely. There are other things going on as well, but yes, it's part of the whole white supremacy, get the term, the settler colonial mentality, very much so. And I think Anya uh, was appealing to the Tucker Carlson demographic. She's friends with Tucker Carlson. She helped, like last year, she tried to help Tucker Carlson arrange an interview with Putin. It fell through that time because the U.S. government blocked it. But second time, she used connections to help out, and she's some friendship with Tucker Carlson, and that's okay. But she's kind of cutting corners, trying to appeal to the right wing Tucker Carlson crowd. Another thing that she did was she's transphobic. She's a TERF. She's a big time TERF. Max isn't, but Anya definitely is. There was the Sarah Ashton Cirillo story. I talked about her earlier. Sarah, so she said, trans women are not women. Like, what? Okay, came from out of nowhere. But recently she had a fight with Brianna Wu, and that's a whole wild story. Don't want to spend too much time on this. Basically, Brianna Wu is nobody. She's a game designer. I forget where she's from. She comes from a really wealthy family, and apparently, once her parents gave her $200,000 to start a gaming company. She's a gamer, and apparently, she got involved in the so-called GamerGate saga, and I think it was 2018, I forget when, during the Trump administration, and a group of right-wing attacks on women gamers, women in the gaming world. And yeah, okay, I don't know the details. Apparently, she tried to make herself look the victim, and I don't really know the details. But she ran for office in Massachusetts, and she lost. Okay, that's her story, and I don't know much about gaming. People say her video games are not that good. Aesthetically, they're not that good. Kind of a failed game designer, maybe a failed politician, you could say. But anyway, she posts a lot on Twitter, like long essays on Twitter, and she's one of those annoying people on Twitter. She posed as a leftist and pro-Palestinian leftist, but she was concerned trolling the left. Like, hey, I'm the left, but she's bitterly complaining about the far left, the fringe left, which she means socialists, the socialists, the actual left. But she was bitterly complaining about that, the far left, how destructive they are. And at one point, she called herself a Democratic Party operative. I don't know. I think she would be. There's some organization which she claims to be the head of. I think it's a paper organization, but the Democratic Party operative. It looked apparent she's aspiring to go back into politics, and very much. Then she's claimed being pro-Palestinian, then she switched to being super pro-Zionist, and she's bashing other people. And she's one of the most. I think she's a vile individual. Looks like she's trying to appeal to AIPAC for AIPAC funding to restart her political career. That's what I and a lot of other people think. She's going, okay, so she's not famous. She wasn't famous. She's chasing clout. Insignificant person. For a while, she was attacking people who were bigger than she was for clout to get herself known, to become famous. And she attacked Anya Parampil for anti-Zionism. Anya posted something critical of horrors that Israel was doing, and then Brianna Wu counterattacked. Mainly, this big bit of a fight going on. Okay, so the correct thing to do would be to, give Brianna Wu a few zingers and ignore, otherwise you don't give her oxygen. Don't take her bait. Don't just tell her to buzz off and don't give her bait. She's a nothing and nobody. So Anya took the bait though, got in this fight, and used a transphobic insult. Transgender women or attacked her for being trans. And a lot of people, I didn't know that Brianna Wu was trans. I didn't even know, most people didn't even know this. She didn't present herself. I didn't know she was trans. So it was attacking her for being trans. So, and also attacking her for allegedly pretending to be Chinese. Now, Brianna Wu is not Chinese. She's took her husband's name, Wu, Chinese American. She took her husband. She's not Chinese. Some people have been attacking her for hiding behind her name, like pretending to be a non-white minority and I think I despise Brianna Wu, but that's an unfair attack. That is, anyway, but what Anya Parampil did, she climbed in the gutter with Brianna Wu doing the same crap she's doing. She started attacking trans people. Like, not her arguments, not attacking Brianna Wu's shitty politics or arguments or grifting, attacking for trans women are not women. And she gave space. A whole bunch of people, really hardcore anti-trans people were posting under her thing. And then another thing, a little bit more recently, someone on Twitter, a leftist on Twitter, I forget who this was, but asked, why do so many people hate Jackson Hinkle? And then so Anya Parampil posted, people hate Jackson Hinkle because he believes in biology. Which means that, he's anti-transgender. It's a code word. He believes in biology, which is nonsense. And then later on that thread, there's some fights. Later on in the thread, Anya Parampil says something like, 40% of all leftist groups are trans. Whoa. Like, that's nonsense. I've been around the left for a while. I've been in socialist organizations. Most are trans-friendly, and sometimes there are trans members. But to say that 40% trans is nonsense. Not only that, she's pandering to the right wing. She's pandering to the right wing stereotype. Oh, they're all gender confused. People dye their hair purple, and pandering she's pandering to the right wing. Really, basically, she's doing what Jackson Hinkle's doing. And I hope, I hope she doesn't take this too far. I like Max Blumenthal. I'm a huge fan. I know a few things I disagree with, but I'm a huge fan of the Grayzone. I completely defend them against smears. And I'm a huge fan of the Grayzone, but Anya Parampil, Holy crap. I mean, she's scary. Okay, anyway, so I'm going to do a brief review of her book, this whole introduction. I read her book, Corporate Coup, about the Juan Guaido coup under the Trump administration about Venezuela. This will have to be impressionistic. I didn't have time to do, or inclination to do tons of research. Basically, okay, I discussed Anya Parampil, Venezuela. Venezuela is a country in the northern part of South America, Latin American countries on the Atlantic and I believe Pacific Oceans and then the Caribbean. It was declared independence from Spain in 1811, but they had a long war for independence, 1820s, 1830s, mostly led by Simon Bolivar. Very complicated. And he had a vision for a vast Latin American federation, Gran Colombia. They would have been able to keep the European colonialists out. They would have been able to keep the U.S. out, develop their own resources. He was like a bourgeois leader, but the era of the heroic age of the bourgeois. He was a cool figure. He had his Grand Columbia theory project. It failed. It fell apart. He died in Europe. It never came to fruition. It could have been a different direction for Latin America. Okay, so he's still a revered figure in Venezuela. His tomb is in Caracas. And okay, so that's the background. So the 19th and first half of the 20th centuries, Venezuela was ruled by basically a series of military strongmen, caudillos. World War One, oil was discovered in Venezuela in during World War One, and it came out of Venezuela. It had huge, vast oil deposits. According to one account, it's the largest in the world. Crude oil. Venezuela's crude oil, not high quality, but crude oil. Not but very important. Second World War, Venezuela was Great Britain's third largest supplier of oil. So after the Second World War, there were attempts to modernize Venezuela, modernize it, and update the system. Some attempts to reform the system. There was an oil glut, and then there were complicated debt crisis and fell into debt, like a lot of the global South fell into debt. And the U.S. kind of used this to impose neoliberalism. There's IMF austerity was imposed on Venezuela. There was a reformist, sort of like progressive president, Carlos Andres Perez. Interesting guy. He buckled under to IMF austerity, really imposed this really severe austerity and crackdowns. And there was an uprising in 1989 in Caracazo. The Caracazo uprising, huge rioting, huge Caracazo, huge uprising in Venezuela. It was crushed. According to the mainstream account, like a couple hundred people were killed, but it's really believe like up to 5,000 people were killed. And this uprising was the beginning of a revolutionary process in Venezuela, which is kind of still going on today. Okay, so Perez was, he filled out, he had corruption charges against him later, basically died a broken man. Okay, another figure, Hugo Chavez, was an army officer. He came from a middle-class family. He was radicalized pretty early on. Apparently, he read the Motorcycle Diaries of Che Guevara, and he picked up a lot of radicalism going on at the time. And Latin America, much of the global South, there are usually the military in the global North, like the U.S. is very conservative, rock Republicans and pretty right-wing, certainly. But parts of the global South, there are radical or nationalist currents in many militaries. So Hugo Chavez got kind of involved in this in story 1977. His battalion was deployed to fight against Marxist-Leninist insurgency. Hoxhaist, followers of Enver Hoxha. They were like leader of Albania at the time. They were an anti-revisionist current. And he, apparently at the time, he had some second doubts. Like, wait a second, maybe these Marxists are basically right. Not this specific group, but he came to have, like, wait a second, maybe these leftists are actually right. Venezuela, like a lot of places in Latin America, the global South had guerrilla insurgencies since inspired by Che Guevara, his ongoing guerrilla insurgencies. And he ended up thinking maybe the left is right, the left is correct. So he founded this revolutionary Bolivarian movement, like in the early 80s. And it was a faction in the military, a small group in the military, and he tried to make connections with civilian radicals, civilian leftists, with Marxist currents. He started making connections. And the military was increasingly nervous about him. They deliberately did not deploy him in areas with radical guerrilla groups. So we saying we can't trust this guy. They tried to. In 1992, there were two coup attempts. His group had a coup attempt. It was part of a bigger movement, but they tried a coup attempt, and it was supposed to trigger an uprising. It was failed, and he was arrested. Then later on, a few months later, his own group, without him, tried another attempt and also failed. And he made this famous speech on television, said, "Where I'm ordering everyone to surrender. We're giving up. We're backing down for now. Por ahora, like for now." And so it's not over yet. He was giving the context. Yeah, we're not ending this yet. Okay, so and he ran for president in 1999 and he won, or 1998 he won, and the Constitution was rewritten. He ran again in 2000. I think 2000, or he had a 2000 election. He won by a pretty wide margin, or over 50%. Anyway, what he did is first, he essentially partially nationalized the state oil industry. It's called the PDVS, something like that. They were supposedly the state oil company. They were theoretically autonomous, which meant that the oligarchs ran it, really. We tried to put it under some greater state control. And there were a variety of other things. The oligarchs were kind of increasingly pissed off at him. They increasingly disliked him. And there was a coup attempt in 2002. It fell apart after 2 weeks. Mass uprising. Hundreds of thousands of people. For this military junta had him on an island for a couple of days. Mass protests. Hundreds of thousands of people. And the army was not happy. Sections of the army were not happy about this either. The coup collapsed. It finally collapsed. And he was released and returned. And he became more radical than he otherwise, kind of radicalized a lot of his base, and more radical than he otherwise would have been. And there were parts of the economy were nationalized. There were what's called communes. There were Bolivarian missions, which was like to help poor people, lower income people. There's a major redistribution of wealth, which enormously benefited poor people in Venezuela. There was utter neglect. Poverty was widespread. Education, healthcare were almost non-existent. This hugely helped many of the common people of Venezuela and became hugely popular. Okay, so the U.S. hated it. U.S. hated him. There were sanctions from Bush to Obama to Trump. U.S. really hated him. There was zillions of sanctions. Chavez was like a flamboyant figure too. He was a charismatic, flamboyant figure. He was at the UN and a famous speech. He denounced Bush. This is when the Gulf War, the Iraq War, was going really bad, and George Bush became intensely unpopular. So he had a speech. The devil was here. I could smell the sulfur. The devil was George Bush. The devil had been here. I could smell, and it was hysterical. It was hysterical, really charismatic figure. Another time, apparently, he met Noam Chomsky, the famous linguist activist. And back then, Noam Chomsky was more popular than he is now. His reputation kind of declined. But and Noam Chomsky's written stuff. I have criticisms of Chomsky myself, but he's written great stuff about U.S. imperialism. And apparently, he met Chomsky, and he's holding the book, which I have. It's like a year, I think it was called Hegemony or Survival, and I have it in my bookshelf here. And Chavez was waving the book around. Later on, Chavez met Obama and gave him a copy of famous book, The Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. I've read it. It's a Uruguayan writer. I read it's a masterpiece. I doubt Obama read it, or Obama didn't care. But I mean, he was kind of a charismatic figure. Now, there's some drawbacks. Venezuela was never socialist. The 70% of the economy remained in private hands, and also there was some fair amount, has to be a fair amount of corruption with the Bali bourgeoisie. There was enormous expansion of the state, which is not necessarily bad, but enormous bureaucratic expansion of the army, which was loyal to Chavez. Things like that were going on, and there were some problems developing, some bottlenecks. And the slogan, he who carries out a revolution halfway becomes his own gravedigger. With the revolutionary process starting to badly stall in some ways. So Chavez died in 2013, died of cancer. There are suspicions, but I won't get into that right now. And Maduro took over. Maduro was a bus driver. He was a union activist and close ally of Chavez, and sort of handpicked successor. The right wing kind of condemned him because he was a bus driver, but he was a pretty shrewd political guy. But now things began according to Left Voice. Left Voice is a Trotskyist group in New York. They're American, but they're connected to Argentine. Argentine group is split from the Renoites. They put out some interesting stuff. They're very I think a strong anti-Maduro line. What was happening under Chavez? Not that he wasn't a socialist. I mean, he claimed to be at times. He formed the PSUV, like a socialist party, a coalition of socialist groups. He was on the left. What he really wanted to do is provide space for the independent development of Venezuelan capitalism out from U.S. hegemony. and it's just not possible. Chavez, interestingly, sometimes he called himself a Trotskyist. He met Alan Woods, who's a leader of the IMT. They changed their name to the Revolutionary Communists. And oddly, Chavez would quote Trotsky, quote Rosa Luxemburg. He'd mentioned Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. Oddly, this explains exactly what went wrong in Venezuela. The idea that the bourgeois class were not able to fulfill their historic role in the French Revolution, 1789. It would be up to the working class from below. And what went wrong in Venezuela is like a textbook case, ironically, of the theory of permanent revolution. And yeah, I would support it. Chavez did a lot of great things to the people of Venezuela, absolutely. And there's a stereotype of Western leftists and Trotskyists. They support every revolution except those that succeed. And there's some grains of truth to this. And have to remember that U.S. imperialism is the main evil in the world, but there's valid criticisms of leftist groups. Okay, the trouble with the pink tide. And the left voice goes in to say that Trotsky he lived in Mexico and he wrote a lot about Latin America, but it hasn't at the time, but much of it hasn't been translated. But what Chavez was essentially is a left Bonapartist. Trotsky a term, sui generis, like a Bonapartist of a special type. Like a Bonapartist came from Marx's experience of the Revolution of 1848 and Louis Napoleon. A Bonapartist would balance off class forces when one group isn't strong enough. Like Louis Napoleon would balance off the working class against the peasantry, against finance capital, balance these forces. Kind of what Chavez was doing is a left Bonapartism, using catapult by working class struggle. So it's a unique form of Bonapartism. There were several other at the time in Latin America had a history of this. The only left Bonapartist which broke from capitalism was Castro. The others, like Morales or Correa in Ecuador and elsewhere, they didn't really ultimately. They did some good things, and I'm not going to bash them, but ultimately they didn't fully break from capitalism. Now, you could say it's not easy to do this. The U.S., the Colossus to the north, is the main, and it is very difficult. I admit this. It's not easy to fully break with capitalism. They're going to destroy you. But anyway, the idea you have to keep moving forward, or you're going to be. Trotsky's politics is the best defense is a good offense. You have to keep moving forward, or you'll be destroyed with politics or as in life. Okay, that's some of the background, some of my take. So, Anya Parampil discusses the coup during the Trump administration, the famous Juan Guaido coup. Okay, the background is very, very complicated, a bit murky. In 2018, there were some Maduro has some parliamentary maneuvers. Basically, the main legislature in Venezuela was the National Assembly. He replaced it with something called the Constituent Assembly. And I don't fully know what was going on with that. Apparently, it was legal according to the Venezuelan constitution as a way of bypassing the right wing. A left voice writer makes the case that it was not due to the working class and the peasantry, but it represents the bureaucracy. I think it's the bureaucracy in the military to protect their privileges, not the working class. And would they make a case that, by 2018 or so, the Bolivarian Revolution was on life support? The U.S. sanctions were devastating. Absolutely. U.S. sanctions, they made international trade difficult. It made it difficult for Venezuela to sell its oil. And it pushed Venezuela into a horrific crisis. But the way they handled it was not great. Apparently, they devalued the bolivar, the currency, to I guess, foreign trade. They cracked down on workers' movements to encourage foreign trade. Help their balance of payments, trade deficit, balance of payments deficit. They cracked down on union activity. There were death squads, and there was a demoralization going on in Venezuelan society by 2018 or so. There's a major demoralization. This replacing the National Assembly was a kind of a weird parliamentary move, and I read different accounts of this from the left. There are different accounts of this, but according to Maduro was reelected in 2018. It was a disputed election. This whole thing gave big space to the right wing, and okay, so 20. I don't know my dates here. I think it was 2020, 21, or I forget, early 2020s. Apparently the head or the temporary acting head of the National Assembly, a guy named Juan Guaido, declared himself to be the president of Venezuela, the legitimate president of Venezuela, and he grouped around him. He formed a government, and he was quickly recognized by the U.S., and the U.S. pressured a bunch of other countries to recognize him. Juan Guaido was an unknown figure. Only 3% of the population ever heard of him. Pepe Escobar jokingly called him random guy. Like nobody ever heard of this guy. He had no following. His party was the Popular Will Voluntad Popular, which was supposed to be a social democratic party. The leader, real leader, and Juan Guaido himself was a tool of a guy named Leopold Lopez. And Lopez was he mentioned this Popular Will. It was part of the Socialist International. Oddly, they didn't really have they didn't believe in anything. If somebody asked Lopez, like, what do you guys believe in? We don't believe in anything. And yeah, there was a tool. This whole thing was a product. It was a U.S. orchestrated coup network of CIA-backed think tanks and NGOs. This was whole planned in advance. Juan Guaido was chosen for this role because he looked mestizo. The oligarchs, the ruling classes of Venezuela are pasty white, like Spanish or Italian background, while the working class and peasantry are largely indigenous mestizo. So he looked more, Juan Guaido looked more mestizo, like average Venezuelans. It kind of looks, so that was a factor too. So the Trump people, mostly Trump appears to have been kind of not really, he approved of it, but not really heavily involved. Pompeo and Bolton, people in the Trump administration, Pompeo especially was pushing really hard for this coup. There's another figure, I forget his name, but guy was a war criminal in the Contra Wars. I forget his name actually, but he Elliot Abrams. Elliot Abrams played a big role in this too. Really, he's a war criminal in Central America. They were pushing this really hard. So a couple of odd incidents. There was the rumble in the jungle, 2020, I believe. This incident where the U.S. military had this helped this aid convoy food convoy supposed to go. Now, as I said, Venezuela was an economic catastrophe. It was mixed. Large parts of the country we were totally okay. Max Blumenthal went to Caracas, an upscale shopping mall in Caracas, and everything did shops where the stores were well stocked. You didn't find some of the working classes, but part of Venezuelan economy was very hard hit. So anyway, so U.S. military and working with groups in Colombia were going to force this food convoy into Venezuela, just force it across the border. And the idea that they're starving, the evil socialist dictator Maduro is going to not allow food into his own people. This was supposed to trigger a political crisis in Venezuela. Basically, the main thing, it was supposed to get part of the military to defect. The U.S. put out an appeal, lots of appeals for the army to defect. Pompeo said, we're going to take good care of you. We'll take good care of you. And it didn't work. And a small number of soldiers did defect, and they were left in the lurch. Like, there were two guys, I forget their names, but there were two guys who were part of this junta, Juan Guaido junta. They were supposed to, their job was to take care, they got a big chunk of money, they would take care of these military people who defected. Instead, they spent it all on these wild parties and cocaine and prostitutes, and it became like a massive orgy of corruption, literally. So, Richard Branson, the billionaire, had this concert, like Aid for Venezuela. It was modeled after the Bob Geldof, Bono, Aid for Africa stuff. Supposed to jump, and it's turned into a fiasco. The food convoy, one of the opposition people, set it on fire. It just became a mass of corruption and confusion. And the military, most part, did not defect. Now, Anya, as far as I remember, she did not mention this, but at one point the Venezuelan army was trolling the CIA. They gave the CIA impression, yeah, we're going to defect, and then they didn't. And then they left the CIA in the lurch. They exposed the CIA plans and stuff. They didn't. There was one thing going on. Another thing going on nearby, same time, there was a Canadian-American mercenary, a guy named Jordan Goodrow. Interesting figure. He was young age. He was fascinated by the U.S. military. Later joined the U.S. military. Got dual citizenship. He had this mercenary company, Silver Corps, which they were big on school security. They're preventing school shootings. They provided protection for Trump. He was a Trump supporter. And they were offered this job, this weird, they agreed to take this chaotic job to go to Venezuela and kidnap Maduro, snatch and grab Maduro. They were going to bring him back to the U.S. and bring him back to the U.S. and charge him with money laundering or whatever. And it was very unlikely this would succeed, but he went along with it anyway. And these guys, the whole thing totally fell apart. Part of his group was surrounded, imprisoned by a group of fishermen who were pro-government fishermen on this island. Whole thing turned into an utter fiasco. And apparently, actually, interviewed this guy. A brief phone interview with Jordan. doing good, real fascinating story, and he felt used by these groups. So, whole wild story. Alex Saab, who's a Colombian businessman of Lebanese background, he sided with the Bolivarian Revolution. Could be seen as a traitor to his class. I really don't know the whole story, but he worked very hard to get aid for Venezuela when the people were starving, economic crisis. He had ties with Iran, but evading the U.S. sanctions and bringing food in, bringing supplies into Venezuela, housing, and worked in the housing industry. Interesting guy. I don't know a huge amount about him, but the U.S. clearly hated him. The U.S. clearly, it's an orchestrated campaign to destroy him. He stopped in, he was coming back from Iran, and he stopped in on the Cape Verde Islands, independent country off the coast of Africa. He stopped there for like a few refueling, John, a few hours, and then the U.S. nabbed him. The U.S. put enormous pressure on Cape Verde to arrest him. The Interpol had like a red flag alert. The U.S. really was pushing very hard to arrest this guy, and they did. They did. He was in jail for quite a while. Quite a while. He alleges that they psychologically tortured him. He brought back to the U.S. I think he was in Miami jail for about a year or so. They eventually let him out in a prisoner exchange, but that was a whole wild story. They treated him horribly. They did let him out eventually, basically psychologically tortured him in Cape Verde, and then they didn't treat him too well in Miami. They were going to treat him like put him in prison for the rest of his life, really, and destroy him, but the whole coup thing fell apart. That's big stuff going on there. Okay, the whole wild stories. Now, the big thing is Citgo was a state. Oh, yeah, before I get that, yeah. So the U.S. recognized Juan Guaido, and he had this small puppet government. He actually was in Venezuela when he was doing this. Venezuelan government let him do it. Didn't arrest him, or didn't really. His cabinet supposedly didn't arrest him. They let him do this, which is kind of for the most part. He traveled back with the U.S. and Europe and stuff. I mentioned there was this guy Ricardo Hauser, I believe. He was previously minister of planning under a previous Venezuelan government. He's a Harvard professor, very corrupt figure. He was part of this network and network of NGOs, really corrupt networks. So there was the later part of the book, she spends a long time, Anya Parampil, talking about Citgo. There's an orchestrated, again, before I get to that too, they're the embassy protectors. The U.S. seized the Venezuelan embassy or at a camp in D.C., basically to cut off electricity, push the legitimate government out, to fight and give this puppet government. There were the embassy protectors, Code Grouper and Code Pink, Medea Benjamin, who occupied it for a while. Max Blumenth, Max and Anya were there. They were in there for a while, and they were actually there. 6 months later, since I think Max Blumenthal was arrested for what he did there, not apparently some woman there accused him of assault. He wasn't, but they trumped up charge of assault. He was in jail for like a day or so. They let him out. I was a little worried if shit he was just to crack down. But so anyway, so there was Anya talks about this weird business financial manipulation to basically seize Citgo, state oil company, Venezuelan state oil company. The government, the U.S. government, essentially, it was very complicated financial stuff going on. They accused it of fronting for the illegally, this is a legal term, representation and illegal representing. It was very complicated. And to me, that was the least interesting part of the book. It's important if you study business law or things like that. It is important, but for me, it's, she did break new ground in that. My eyes kind of glazed over, but the U.S. government forced Citgo into a fire sale and basically just redistributed their assets to major Western oil companies, essentially. That was basically confiscated it to these oil companies and the major assets. And there was a split in the Venezuelan opposition. Like, wait a second, his opponents didn't like Maduro for a variety of reasons, or they were right on the right, but they regard themselves, some of them regard themselves as Venezuelan nationalists. And, wait a second, the U.S. is seizing our state oil company. That's not what we want. I mean, we don't like Maduro. We don't like what they thought is socialism. But wait a second, we don't want to be puppets of the U.S. either. So there was a split in the right. Juan Guaido became a very rather unpopular figure. He lost most of his following. His thing collapsed in 2022. Biden continued Trump's policy. In fact, he criticized Trump's policy for being too weak. And he continued, but the coup collapsed until by 2022. It definitively collapsed. And so, a whole interesting story. And Anya Parampil does a good job of explaining it. For the most part, she does not break new ground. If you follow the Grayzone, I did. I watched the Grayzone during that period. You'll be familiar with this. It's great for normies, like people who are not obsessive left-wing political junkies like me, who follow this kind of stuff. Average normies who watch CNN or NPR or whatever. It's good. It's good. It's a good antidote. It's a good antidote to the corporate media narratives. But she doesn't go any deeper. Why? Why did this opening come? It's not. Yeah, U.S. sanctions were horrible, and U.S. imperialism, I think, is the main enemy. But what was going on in Venezuela that gave U.S. imperialism an opening? How the National Assembly elections, the opposition did pretty well. You didn't get the same enthusiasm you got in 2002 when hundreds of thousands of people marched for Chavez. What was going on here? And, she could have done a little more criticism of Maduro from the left. She takes an elitist approach. She interviews people, has talked to a lot of people, but people from the top, like top leaders in the U.S. and Venezuela, key figures. I would have liked more interviews with working class people, organizers on the ground, organizers, people in the barrios, like different perspective of what's really going on here. I mean, she's good at what she does as far as it goes. She does it's good. It's important work, but as far as it goes, yeah, absolutely. But I would have liked a deeper analysis of it. Also, something I'd love to know is what's happening now. I mean, she does mention at the end the Ukraine war helped Venezuela. This politically crystallized the coming together of the BRICS countries, anti-U.S. hegemonic bloc, like China and Russia became much close but unofficial alliance. There's an official alliance between Russia and Iran. This whole thing was crystallized by what's going on in the Russian intervention in the Ukraine war. And there's, rise of the global south, there are uprisings in West Africa, French colonialists being kicked out. And this is all because of a multipolar world. And this helped Venezuela a lot. Countries are now like violating the U.S. Nobody cares about, not nobody, but other non-Western countries don't care about the U.S. sanctions. Russia's doing, and Iran are openly doing more trade with Venezuela. It's immeasurably helped Venezuela get out of the situation the U.S. put them into. And there's been some revival in Venezuela, and then she discusses that, and this is really interesting. But I would have liked to see more of a discussion of the revolutionary process in Venezuela. Are there more nationalizations? Are there more government, more worker control of industries? What's going on the ground? I would have preferred something like that. She very much takes a top-down approach. It's good as far as it goes. It's good for no. Most of the left is like, we're deluged. Mainstream media were deluged with pro-imperialist messages. Ukraine, Venezuela, Israel, Palestine. Where the mainstream media is pro-imperialist, and so people on the left want to counter those narratives, rightfully so. But we also need a bit of a deeper analysis. And I get it, the Western leftist stereotype of Western leftists. They support every revolution except the ones that succeed. There's some truth to that, but I'd also say that a revolution, he who makes a revolution halfway becomes their own gravedigger. So you got to keep that in mind. And anyway, that's it for now. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe, and have a good day. Thank you.